The Magos primary completed his scans as he closed the last few dozen yards, logging every detail as a matter of potential importance. 6 of the figures, the ones on the flanks, were clad in tactical dreadnought armor, their off-white slabs of plasteel, ceramite and adamantium caked with the valley's pervasive dust. Otte's internal processor registered a degree of awe at the presence of such blessed battlesuits, even as his analysis moved on to the other 6. They made for a less uniform gathering. All were Space Marines, 2 in the grey power armor that predominated in this particular chapter, 2 in the blue battleplate that Otte's data files informed him belonged to sanctioned Adeptus Astartes psychers. The 5th wore red ceramite, and bore upon his breastplate the wondrous machina opus of the Adeptus Mechanicus. Approval at the presence of the Tegmarine barely registered before Otte took in the final figure. He stood apart from his brethren, alone, a dozen paces behind them. Even by the standards of the Adeptus Astartes, the figure was a giant, standing a head above the rest. He too was clad in tactical dreadnought armor, and for a moment, Otte's analytics glitched, informing him he was looking at a graven statue. A slight shift in the giant's stance removed that possibility. Dust cascaded from the cliff-like plates of his immense suit, and his huge, wickedly barbed gauntlets. Every inch of the warrior was clad and armed with the most hallowed and rare pieces of war gear Otte had ever set his optics upon. It made the Space Marines standing in the giant's shadow seem like children. He was not supposed to be here. In 3 centuries overseeing exchanges such as these, Otte had never once encountered him. Binaric discord filled his thought algorithms for almost 2 whole seconds before he regained cognitive control. He misstepped, the slight change in motion enough for Kraft to thought count him. "Is there a problem, Primary?" "Negative. Proceed," he replied, filing away the shame he felt at his moment of weakness for later analysis.
Focus on its maw.
The Sensorium serfs did as ordered, directing the ship's remaining bow pickcasters towards the hideous, fleshy, mouth-like orifice that constituted the Hive ship's prow. It swam into view across the displays, row upon row of incisors the size of escort ships, backed by billions of waving latch fronds, all coated in icy streamers of digestive juices and ectoplasm. Around the gaping hole, other, smaller orifices were puckering, the softer flesh surrounding them writhing with vile subdermal motion. As Carcharadon watched, the openings contracted and belched forth a stream of hideous fluid, followed by what looked like hook-nosed flesh darts. There were dozens of them, and they left their rapidly freezing afterbirth behind as they shot towards the Nicor.
Focus close-range defense systems,
Tyberos ordered. Gunnery relayed the command over the Vox, and within a minute, the Nicor's close protection batteries were firing, lighting up the void around it with laddering spears of munitions and energy bursts. Carcharadon saw one boarding pod after another hit and burst apart, spilling effluvium into the vacuum, shuddering and writhing in their death throes. The flesh of the Hive ship beyond rippled as it birthed another wave of the organic attack craft, all the while bearing down on the Carcharodon's flagship.
"Pale Nomad, with me,"
Tyberos said.
"Atea, you have the bridge." "Where to, my lord?"
Carcharadon asked, as he joined the red wake in descending from the command platform.
"The defense batteries won't be able to stop them all,"
Tyberos said. Section T-16 had been breached. One of the Tyranid boarding pods had made it through the Nicor's protective barrage, wounded and trailing Icor, but with its internal gestation sacs intact. The Nicor's external pickcasters had caught it as it latched its lamprey-like maw onto a section of hull and began to gnaw, the grinding motion of its rows of serrated teeth, aided by the toxic bile continuously spewed by its acidic gut. Section T-16 was the first part of the ship beyond the armor plating the creature had attached itself to. It was an external service corridor, largely disused, lying frigid and dark, its bare metal walls and pipes scummed with void mold. Tyberos and Carcharadon entered it, just as the boarding creature's bile burned its way through the last of the plasteel and adamantium, spilling out into the corridor in a stinking yellow tide writhing with alien insects. The two Carcharodons had descended into the service corridor alone. Carcharangi knew better than to question the Red Wake's decision not to bring any of the Red Brethren to the breach. There were times when the Reaper Lord of the Void brooked no competition for the kill.
Close the void lock,
Tyberos ordered over the ship-wide Vox channel. The heavy doors leading to the service tunnel could be closed in the event of a hull breach, sealing the resultant vacuum off from the rest of the ship. Doing so meant the Red Wake and the Pale Nomad would be trapped until the disengagement protocols allowed the lock to be opened once more. It also meant the Xenos would take longer to access the rest of the ship. A buzzer sounded, and the corridor shuddered as the doors behind Tyberos and Carcharangi ground shut. The lighting began to flicker as this section of the ship switched to reserve power. The bile spurting from the breach had reduced to a trickle, leaking through the molten hole burrowed in the Nicor's hull. For a moment, there was nothing but the patter of the alien fluids and the distant, vibrating heartbeats of the battle barge's engines and weapons systems. Then, the first Xenos emerged. It dragged itself from the fleshy depths of the boarding creature and out through the breach, splashing down amidst the spreading bile on 4 of its 6 limbs. It was large, a Tyranid warrior genus, modified for boarding operations. The digits of its upper limbs extended in diamond-hard claws, useful for rending open bulkheads, while those lower down were arranged bioweapon mesh that drooled more acidic bile. Its front was more heavily armored than usual, chitin plates protecting his torso and elongated skull in the confines of the narrow tunnels and corridors it had been bred to kill in. Its entire body was slick and dripping with embryonic fluids. Still on 4 limbs, it turned its head slowly towards the 2 Carcharodons at the end of the corridor and emitted a low, warning hiss.
Remain behind me, Pale Nomad,
Tyberos said, beginning to advance towards the Xenos. The creature stood and began to move towards the Red Wake, picking up speed. Behind it, another was dragging itself through the breach, claws scraping fused adamantium. Carcharangi gripped his force staff tighter, the green stone at its tip glowing with psychic power. The first warrior shrieked and broke into a charge, its hooves drumming on the deck plates. Tyberos answered it with a great, electrified crack as his talons sprang forwards from their gauntlets, bathed in blue energy. Hunger and Slake had awoken. Carcharangi had seen the Red Wake fight and kill many times before. Regardless, it was always a special privilege to witness the elemental destruction unleashed when the master of the Carcharadon Astra was called upon to render judgment. Tyberos met the first of the boarding Tyranid warriors head-on, his own charge making the entire service tunnel quake. The force of his impact carried the Xenos off its hooves, slamming it through the air and then back down into the deck plates with an ear-splitting crack. Tyberos planted one great boot on its chitin-plated breast, and fast as lightning, slashed down from left to right with hunger. The great swing of the gauntlet's charged lightning claws sheared through the wall to the Carcharodon's left, severed the warrior's head, and carried on to slice into the wall on the right, leaving a trio of glowing gouges to either side that were immediately splattered with purple ichor. The Red Wake moved on immediately, his weight cracking open a twitching warrior's carapace as he lunged towards the next of its brood kindred. Slake took this one, its wicked hooked tips scything down from the warrior's skull to its groin, releasing a burst of viscous gore and writhing bio-things. A follow-up thrust from Hunger cracked the Tyranid's skull apart in a welter of grey cranial matter. The combined force and speed of the Red Wake's attacks was without equal. It was to be expected that the hulking chapter master, clad in tactical dreadnought armor, would smash and break his way through almost any and all opposition. What opponents did not anticipate was how quickly Tyberos moved when roused to battle, how his gauntlets became a blur in the ichor-slashed air. While his center of mass remained largely static, his thick plasteel and adamantium plates absorbing attacks with ease, the extra servo bundles in the armor's shoulders and arms allowed him to strike faster than even an unencumbered member of the Adeptus Astartes. It was this advantage that meant the first 3 Tyranid warriors to board the Nicor hardly managed to land a single blow. Carcharangi, a dozen paces behind the Red Wake, hadn't even raised his staff. Tyberos had advanced as far as the breach. He eviscerated another warrior as it dragged itself through the hull, its reinforced chitin no match for his ancient lightning claw's disruptor fields. The lumen strips in the service corridor continued to dip on and off, occasionally throwing its length into darkness. The towering form of the Red Wake left silhouetted by the actinic crackling of his two fists.
The pod will continue producing and birthing bioforms,
Tyberos said, as though he wasn't single-handedly stymieing a Tyranid infestation of the Nikor's lower decks.
I'm going to purge it from within. Remain here, and kill anything else that emerges.
Again, if any other besides the Red Wake had uttered such orders, Carcharadon would have questioned them. Instead, he simply confirmed over the Vox, and took up position beside the breach. Tyberos took one leaden step up into the orifice that had clamped and sealed around the acid-chewed hole. Servos groaning, he hauled his bulk into the opening. Beyond where the thousands of snaggled teeth that had gnawed through the hull, each longer than Tyberos, was tall. Past them was darkness, emitting a gut-churning alien reek.
Rangu and the wandering ancestors be with you, Red Wake,
Carcharadon said, as Tyberos began to advance down the alien's gullet, squelching and crunching through membranous tissue and cartilage. If he heard the chief librarian, Tyberos didn't answer. Instead, there was a roar, as Hunger and Slake's chain-blade underbites activated.